Welcome back to the channel. As you know, we've been reviewing Lovecraft Country, and today we're doing episode 3 titled Holy Ghost. Let's just top it off by saying Jurnee Smolett deserves her things. She was a tour de force the entire episode. So let's just get started with breaking it down. We open at the funeral for George, and we're sort of focused in on Letty, sort of watching everything take place, and she's just sort of not reacting to anything. Towards the end of it, she sort of sheds a tear, sort of letting some of that emotion go. But the next thing that we see is sort of this slate that gives us some context for what we're going to see in this episode about colored folks moving into a northern neighborhood and 3 people disappearing. And pioneering is dangerous is the final sentence. Then it's day 1. So we see Letty leading Ruby down this street in this white neighborhood, and she tells Ruby that she bought a house. Now, the house doesn't look great, but it's hers. Ruby's just sort of thinking this is a prank. Where'd you get the money to buy a house? Letty just sort of shakes that off, walks in, and we sort of get this view of the house. It's a huge house, but it definitely needs some work. It's dark, it's dank, it's dusty as all get out. And she says that she wants to convert it into affordable living for other colored folks in the neighborhood. You know, there's safety in numbers, and if Letty's moving into this place with, I think, up to like 13 rooms, it'd be a great opportunity to, 1, make money, and 2, have more colored folks move to the north side of Chicago. Ruby's worried, but, you know, Letty sort of says this is a chance for us to be sisters, to get closer together, and it'd be nicer than living in that halfway house Ruby's been living in. And it'd also be a nice way for Letty to repay all the times that Ruby's looked out for her. So she accepts, and they decide to, you know, they'll move into the house. While Letty's giving her a little view around, she shows her that there's an elevator that sort of takes you up and down the floors. It's not working at the moment, but then Letty sort of looks in, and then the elevator slams down, almost decapitating Letty. But just in time, she moves back and sort of tries to laugh it off. But Ruby and I are on the same page. There's nothing funny about almost being murdered by an elevator. In the next shot, we see Hippolyta getting ready out of her vanity. You can see that she's just sort of really looking sullen, and the loss of George is reflecting on, or, you know, affecting her negatively. Her vanity is right next to what we can assume is George's bookcase. And to take note, you know, like I say, it's always important to take notes of the books that people are reading. So she pulls out a copy of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which we come to find out is George's favorite book. And she starts ripping pages out of it. And I think what that is, and this is just me sort of spitballing here, Hippolyta is sort of resentful that George left her, you know. She wishes, you know, I was asking to do the trip instead of you. I could have gone on the trip with you. Maybe there was a way that I could have prevented this from happening. You know, so I think that there's a mix of grief and sadness there that she's taking out on the pages of his favorite book. I think this is an interesting scene. So he gets to Montrose's house. Montrose is drunk again. And we also get another focus on the Count of Monte Cristo, which is interesting. This is the second time that this is the third time, I think, that we've seen this book either mentioned or shown in relation to the character of Montrose. Montrose is having some sort of dream, and Tick gets some water from the kitchen and throws it on him to shock him out of his sleep. And Tick sort of can tell just by the mumblings of the story that it's something that he's heard before, a story about a man that appeared out of nowhere, swinging a bat like Jackie Robinson and rescuing George and Montrose from some white men who were sort of in this mob, like this mob of white men that were going to do them harm. And it harkens back to the first episode where we see Jackie Robinson kill the space creature. So we're starting to see a lot of these pieces connect again. This is a story that Montrose and George always told Tick. It's something that's always stuck in his mind, and it's playing out in his dreams. And I think there's also another thing that's interesting for me to note here, and it's that sort of when Montrose gets up to change, he throws on this yellow polo, which is just like the one that Tick was wearing in episode 2. And so here I'm sort of getting this vibe that, the paternity of Tick's father is still up in question. He has some of George's tendencies, but he also has some of Montrose's tendencies. So that connection is there between both of them. There's this confrontation between Tick and Montrose. Tick is asking if he can stay there for a while because he feels like he's overstayed his welcome with Hippolyta. Montrose is like, sure. But then they're having a conversation about, Tick feeling guilty and feeling weird about not telling Hippolyta and Dee the truth of what happened to George. And so the story that they've concocted is that Sheriff Johnson, the sheriff from the town in episode 1, shot George, and then Tick and Montrose killed the sheriff. And so that's the story that they've told everyone. We have enough evidence to sort of support that, and so that's just what we go with. But Tick is conflicted about it. Montrose doesn't want to have that conversation anymore. He sort of, reacts in anger, and then Tick sort of says, well, it seems like I can't stay here either. So then Tick again takes off. So now it's day 2 of Letty moving into her house, gets back downstairs, and Tick arrives. So he wants to say his goodbyes. He's realized that, he doesn't really feel welcome in Hippolyta's place. He doesn't really want to stay with Montrose, and so he's going to get going. He's saying that he's going to head back to Florida. Letty says she has a spare room, and she's like, it'd be great if you stayed a couple more days. And he kind of says, I promised I would go. But then we start seeing the sort of harassment from the white neighbors. Now, remember, Letty's moved into this north side neighborhood. Now on the north side of Chicago, predominantly white, a lot of racist, and they don't want their city or their neighborhood integrated. So they're making it very clear that Letty and her tenants are not welcome. And then we also see that the police are compliant in the harassment that she's receiving. So Tick offers to stay a little bit longer just to make sure everything is smoothed over. So we're at day 5. The harassment continues. The white residents have placed bricks on their car horns to just consistently blare out a car horn sound day and night. But then we sort of get the inkling of this house being haunted. There's a ghost with her jaw missing, and the covers are snatched off of Letty. The radiator is going bananas. It's just all too much happening at once. And so Letty heads down to the basement to check out the radiator, and it is going out of whack. She's able to fix that, but then she's starting to hear rumblings and bangings coming from the back of the basement. After some investigation, she finds out that there's a whole room under the basement with voices coming out of it and slamming and knocking. There's something definitely wrong with this house. She has Tick go and investigate. There is an entire sort of room that looks like a cell, honestly, below the basement. So there's a basement below the basement, and it's just creepy and freaky. And she tells Tick that she's hearing things. We don't see anything, we don't hear anything once they're both down there. So Letty at this point tries to show Tick some affection. She grabs his hand and he pulls away, and it's really sort of dejecting to Letty. I don't know what really is the issue there. Maybe there's like some PSD from the war. I don't know, but Tick sort of just draws back, and Letty sort of takes that to heart. So now we're at day 8, and it's the housewarming party. And this is my kind of function. Letty's sort of working the room, passing out cocktails, conversing with people, and we hear this really interesting tidbit of information taking place. They're having a conversation about Martin Luther King and how he previously had a white girlfriend, but as he's going to be the new leader of the civil rights movement, he had to marry a black woman. And so there's a little bit of truth there. There's a little bit of play there. Martin Luther King, in a 1968 memoir, did talk about having a white girlfriend. Or not a white girlfriend, but, there was a white girl and he was really fond of her. But, things changed, things happened, and they were not together. So I thought that was a really interesting thing for them to sort of jump in, to sort of put in there. Tick arrives late to the party. He's in his army uniform. The girls are swooning. I'm one of the girls. And he's going around sort of, seeing what's going on, and he finally sees Letty sort of on the dance floor, sort of really giving a performance with the guy that she's dancing with. And then you see the room behind Tick go black, and it's kind of like his personality changes. And there's something weird there, So then the next time we see them, Letty sort of going to the bathroom to freshen up. We see a ghost in the frame, and then the camera pans down, and when it pans back up again, we see Tick in the door frame, and he sort of rushes in and kisses Letty, and they sort of get down to the get down with a good 1-2 against the wall. I am not mad about it. But there was something off about that for me for a second there. I mean, honestly, I thought it was like that sort of doppelganger of Tick that we saw in the mansion previously. It just seemed out of character for him. But you know what? Maybe this was also sort of him sort of pissing on his fire hydrant because afterwards he's very disconnected and he goes back downstairs and, Letty sort of tells him that's, they have an accident where Letty bleeds because, as we find out, it's her first time. And it's just really an awkward situation. I'm not really a fan of how Tick addressed that or how he handled that. I don't know what that was. I just didn't like it. Let's also talk about the conversation that Letty has with Hippolyta. Hippolyta has all this grieving food that's been sent to her house since George's funeral, so she's happy to offload it for Letty's housewarming. And she sort of airs out some of the grievances she's been having with Tick. One of them being that he leaves the coffee cups up to dry. George used to turn the coffee cups over. And so it's just one of those things that she's gotten used to that now that she doesn't have anymore is sort of upsetting to her. And I think this is also one of those things, and this is my personal sort of suspicion, this is one of those things that's meant to sort of leave the paternity up in the air. So, Montrose and Tick have the same affinity for yellow. George has a tendency to leave cups down, Tick leaves them up. So there's some personality traits there that sort of are akin to Montrose, but then we have Tick and George shared affection for sort of space and H.P. Lovecraftian novels. So, there's some sort of shared traits between both of them, so we can't really tell whose son Tick is yet. And there's another cool sort of thing that takes place during this housewarming party. So in the basement, Dee is with some other children, one of them named Bobo, who we come to find out through the Ouija board that's actually Emmett Till. So if you look at Bobo in this scene, he's wearing like the exact sort of outfit in a picture of Emmett Till from the past. And he sort of asked how his trip is going to go in the Ouija board, or he asked if he's going to enjoy his trip, and the Ouija board says no. We know that on this trip, Emmett Till was brutally murdered. So it's another one of those sort of cultural notes that is intertwined in the story that I think is really interesting. But then we see the other child, Gil, ask who they're talking to. The Ouija board responds by saying George is dead. And sort of Dee is very upset and runs off. And so we need to put a pin in that because, as we know, some people come back to life, some people die. We've seen Letty resurrected. We see that this house is full of ghosts now. So we don't know if what's dead is really dead yet. So is George going to come back? We don't know. Another thing that we want to put a pin on is that little scene with Hippolyta. So after Dee runs off, we see Hippolyta walking around the house, and a door opens, and in a room we find a metal orrery, and an orrery is sort of a mechanical model of a solar system with the sun and its planets. Now, we don't know if this orrery is supposed to represent our constellation or if it's some other constellation, but it is beautiful. And we do know Hippolyta is sort of enthralled with space. And so we know that Hippolyta is meant to go in this room. Why? We don't know. Where this orrery came from, we don't know. Will it play a role in future episodes? Absolutely. So put a pin in this scene. So after that moment in the bathroom between Tick and Letty, we see Letty coming back downstairs, and we come to find out that the white residents of the neighborhood have put a burning cross on her lawn. And this is just the final straw. After 7, now 8 days of continuous harassment, after these sort of interpersonal issues with Tick, Letty just doesn't want to deal with this anymore. So she grabs a bat and she goes out and starts destroying the cars with the bricks on the horns. And she's sort of knocking the bricks off the horns. She's busting out the windows. Tick and some other guys sort of grab shotguns to sort of be prepared. And then, as we know that the police are going to come eventually, Ruby hops in a car. They put the guns and the bat in the trunk, and she drives off, taking away the evidence. And they all get on their knees, just preparing to be arrested as peacefully as possible. But kudos to Letty, sort of just letting it be known that I'm not putting up with this. I'm not one of your little friends. So we see that Letty is the only one arrested and placed on the back of the police van. And this scene is sort of really disturbing, but also very informative. We're introduced to this police officer who is an obvious, complete, and total racist and has no regard for Black people or Black associations, calling the National Urban League the Monkey Urban League. He's just a horrible person, but he does give away a lot of the game. So he tells Letty about the previous owner of the Winthrop house, and so that's what this house is known as. It's the Winthrop house. Let's be correct about that. It's the Winthrop house, and it was previously owned by a scientist named Hiram Epstein. Now, the police officer also lets us know that 8 Black bodies were found in that house for the last owner. So he's, obviously assuming and saying in a very snide way that Black people don't last long in that house and that she probably won't either. So fast forward to day 10, and Tick meets Letty at a diner, and we really finally get the breakdown of everything that's happened in this house and the history thereof. So we find out the names of the 8 Black people who were found in that house, and they were murdered. They were being experimented on by Hiram Epstein, the previous owner of the house. So Winthrop House is called that because the original owner of the house was named Winthrop, and we find out that he has a connection to the Order of the Ancient Dawn later. So we find out that that police officer was very interested in what Letty knew about that house, because that police officer, Hiram Epstein, and the lead detective on the missing persons case for those 8 Black people were all connected. They were all followers of the Order of Ancient Dawn, or its offshoot led by Mr. Winthrop, the original owner of the house. And so Hiram Epstein was doing the sort of experimentation. The police officer was the one supplying him with subjects, and the lead detective of the case was helping to keep it covered up. And so the police detective wasn't just racist, he was also worried about his secrets being exposed. So Letty, knowing that her house is possessed, seeks the help of a priestess to have the house cleansed. So through connections that her mother had, her mother used to be some sort of fraud that pretended that she could commune with the spirits, but she really couldn't. But she knew people who could. And so this priestess sacrifices a goat and uses the blood to not only put a seal of protection on the house, but to also put one on Letty and Tick. So they decide to go down to the basement, under the basement, and start a ritual to cleanse the house of the spirits trapped therein. Now, while this ritual is taking place, 3 white neighbors break into the house and plan to do more harassing of Letty and the residents of the house. So these 2 things are happening at the same time. That's important because while Letty and the other 2 are in the basement, these 3 white men are murdered by the spirits in the house. 2 of them are sort of, we can assume, murdered by this sort of giant man with a baby's head, and one of them is decapitated by the elevator that almost killed Letty. Now, when we're in the basement, we sort of see this sort of rumbling taking place while the priestess does her rituals, and then everything dies down. But then the sprinklers go off, and the water from the sprinklers wipes off the marks, and then everything goes left. The priestess is then possessed by the ghost of Winthrop, the original owner of the house, who attacks Tick and then possesses Tick's body. At this point, Letty calls upon the names of the dead victims, the dead 8 victims who are trapped in the house. And while the possessed Tick is coming towards Letty, Letty and the 8 victims sort of join hands and continue the ritual to expel Winthrop. This ritual also restores the spirits of the 8 victims, and so not only are they able to expel Winthrop from the house, but the spirits are also able to find peace. Now, a moment to definitely put a pin in is what happens next. So people are moving back into the house. The house has been cleansed. Letty is being interviewed by a black reporter about, sort of what she's using her house for and how it's an amazing opportunity for creating affordable housing on the north side of Chicago. And then off the record, the reporter asks her about the 3 missing white men in her neighborhood, something that Letty doesn't know about at all. Remember, at the time of these sort of white men being at the house, Letty was in the basement, under the basement, performing the ritual. So, it's impossible to know what happened. But then we find, after they get out of the elevator goes down below the basement, and then it's passing another level that seems to be protected by these glowing runes. And once it gets down to this sort of final floor tunnel, we see the 3 white men that were murdered in this tunnel, along with the remains of several other bodies that, looking at them, you can tell they've been there for a long time. In this long tunnel that stretches down to an end that we don't see. So we don't know what's at the end of this tunnel. We don't know where these bodies came from either. But we also don't know who put those bodies down there. So in the final sort of scene of this episode, we get all the information that we need about the Order of the New Dawn, or Order of the Ancient Dawn, and sort of what this house has to do with the grander story. And so Tick is scoping out the realtor that was responsible for getting Letty that house. And we see the silver Bentley pull up, and Christina gets out of the car. So we find out Christina Braithwaite is the orchestrator of everything. She's the one who's actually responsible for the inheritance that Letty is assuming was from her mother. It was actually sort of money that Christina Braithwaite gave her. Then Christina Braithwaite also bribed the realtor to show her that house and convince her to buy it. So for some reason, she needs Letty in that house. And we find out that it has something to do with the fact that it was owned by Horatio Winthrop. Horatio Winthrop was one of the founding members of the Order of the Ancient Dawn with Titus Braithwaite. And if we go back to that we go back to the second episode. We go back to the second episode when we're looking at that painting, Genesis 2:39. There are names on the outside of it. The founders are the original founders of the order. One of those names is Horatio Winthrop. We find out that Horatio Winthrop was kicked out of the order because he stole a few pages and sort of absconded to Chicago. And he was able to use those pages to craft his own spells. So the Book of Names allows people to speak the language of Adam, and by speaking that language, they're able to perform these sort of magical, or create these magical abilities. Now, for Samuel Braithwaite, he was able to be invulnerable. Now, this explains why he was able to have his rib removed, and he was immediately able to get back in the game. He jumped off the table, had full conversations, and hosted a dinner with all the grandeur necessary. And this also sort of implies that Christina Braithwaite has used sort of the knowledge that she's received from the Book of Names to construct some spells of her own, most notably sort of creating this invisible barrier that we've seen used twice now. So what she's saying is that if she could find these pages that Horatio Braithwaite stole, that she might be able, or anyone who could find them, would be able to decipher the language of Adam and have untold power. So the powers that people have been able to display as of late, the invulnerability, sort of invisible walls, all came from one chapter. But what they want to do is decipher the entire language. All in all, this was a great episode. Again, Jurnee Smolett was an amazing performance as Letty. She gave us sort of the entire gamut of emotions, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Tick, Letty, and the rest of the gang can uncover about this Book of Names and the language of Adam. Because I think if our group can start figuring out some of these magical spells for themselves, then Christina's going to be in trouble. So I'll catch you guys next time, and thanks for coming by.